The waiter placed the leather folder on our table. My husband Derek slid it toward me with a smirk. I opened it and gasped at the $8,800 total. When I looked up confused, he announced to his entire family, "Ashlyn will handle this." When I questioned him, he leaned in close. "It is your job to pay. If you do not like it, get a divorce. You are not part of our family anyway." I paid and left, feeling shattered. But 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Derek, his voice frantic, begging for my help. I never imagined my marriage would crumble over a dinner bill. 4 years ago, when I married Derek Blackwell, I thought I had found my forever partner. At 32, I had built a successful career as a financial consultant in Seattle, helping high-net-worth clients manage their investments and plan for their futures. The irony that I could not see the financial disaster in my own marriage still stings. Derek came from old money. His family owned a chain of luxury hotels across the Pacific Northwest, and they lived in a mansion overlooking Puget Sound. I grew up in a small town in eastern Washington, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. Everything I had, I earned through scholarships, student loans, and working multiple jobs through college. My background was something Derek claimed to admire about me when we first met. "You understand the value of $1, he told me on our third date as we walked along the waterfront. "My family throws money around like it means nothing. You are different." Our wedding was modest by his family's standards, though still more lavish than anything I had experienced. His mother, Jacqueline, commented that it was charmingly simple, a backhanded compliment that I chose to ignore. His father, Richard, gave a toast that focused more on the Blackwell legacy than our future together. Still, I was determined to be accepted by them eventually. For the first 2 years, Derek and I lived in what I thought was harmony. We bought a beautiful house in Queen Anne, close enough to his family to visit regularly, but far enough to maintain our independence. I continued building my client portfolio while Derek worked in the family business, ostensibly learning all aspects of hotel management to eventually take over from his father. Little comments started cropping up about 6 months ago. When I mentioned setting aside more for our retirement accounts, Derek scoffed. "We will inherit more than we could ever spend," he said dismissively. "Why save when we have the family fortune?" When I suggested we create a joint budget, he grew irritated. "Do you not trust me? My family has managed wealth for generations." Then came the dinner invitations. The Blackwells had always hosted regular family dinners, but recently I noticed they were happening without me. Derek would come home late, smelling of expensive wine, offering vague explanations about last-minute business discussions. When I expressed hurt at being excluded, he assured me it was just boring business talk. "You would not enjoy it, Ash," he would say. "Just old men talking about profit margins." Last week, Derek announced that his parents' 35th anniversary was approaching, and they wanted to celebrate with a family dinner at Le Chateau, the most exclusive restaurant in Seattle. "Mom specifically asked that you join us," he said, which surprised me given how Jacqueline barely acknowledged me at family gatherings. She wants the whole family there. I spent days preparing, buying a new dress, getting my hair done, even researching the restaurant to make sure I ordered appropriately. I wanted to make a good impression, to finally feel like part of the Blackwell family. The evening started pleasantly enough. The restaurant overlooked Elliott Bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the sunset over the water. Jacqueline Eyre kissed my cheeks, while Richard gave me a firm handshake. Derek's sister Amanda was there with her husband Grant, both looking immaculate as always. Derek's brother Thomas arrived late, bringing his new girlfriend Jessica, a willowy blonde who worked as a curator at the Seattle Art Museum. As we settled into our seats, Richard ordered champagne for the table. "Only the best for our anniversary," he declared, selecting a vintage that cost $600 per bottle. I tried not to wince at the price. The conversation flowed around me, full of inside jokes and references to people I had never met. I smiled and nodded, occasionally offering comments that were acknowledged politely before the discussion moved on. Derek, seated beside me, seemed to transform throughout the evening, adopting his family's mannerisms and speech patterns, becoming almost unrecognizable from the man I knew at home. Jacqueline dominated the conversation, regaling us with stories about their recent trip to Monaco. "The yacht we chartered was simply divine," she said, swirling her champagne. "The captain knew all the private coves. We must all go next time." "Speaking of trips," Amanda interjected, turning to Jessica, "have you finalized your wardrobe for Aspen next month? The chalet has limited closet space, so we all have to pack judiciously." I frowned slightly. "Aspen? I did not know we had a trip planned." The table fell silent. Amanda looked to Derek, who suddenly became very interested in his menu. Jacqueline cleared her throat. "Oh, did Derek not mention it? We do this every year, darling. Family ski week in January. We have been planning it for months." "I must have forgotten to bring it up," Derek said, not meeting my eyes. "It is just a tradition, nothing special." "Nothing special?" Thomas laughed. "Only the most exclusive resort in Aspen, a private chalet, and the best ski instructor's money can buy. Mom has been coordinating this since August." My stomach twisted as I realized I had never been included in the planning. This was not a sudden oversight. They had been arranging this trip for months without mentioning it to me. "Well," I said, forcing a smile, "I should check my calendar. January is usually busy with client tax planning." "Oh, I do not think you would enjoy it much anyway," Jacqueline said smoothly. "It is really more of a Blackwell tradition, perhaps next year." Derek said nothing to defend me or insist I be included. He simply nodded and changed the subject, asking about the wine selection. In that moment, I felt more like an outsider than ever before. Le Chateau was everything its reputation promised. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in pristine white linen. The silverware gleamed, each piece perfectly aligned, and the bone china plates featured the restaurant's signature gold rim. At the center of each table stood a single orchid, elegantly arranged in a crystal vase. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional clink of glasses. As we settled into our plush velvet chairs, a sommelier approached with the wine list, a leather-bound tome thicker than many books I had read. Richard waved it away. "We will start with the Dom Perignon Rosé," he announced. "2 bottles, and bring us your chef's selection of appetizers, the full spread." The sommelier nodded reverently and glided away. I discreetly checked the wine menu left on the table and felt my chest tighten. Each bottle cost over $500. This was already becoming an extravagant evening, and we had not even ordered food yet. "So, Ashlyn," Jacqueline said, adjusting her diamond bracelet, "Derek tells us your little financial advising business is doing well." I bristled at the diminutive description, but kept my smile in place. "Yes, I recently took on several new clients and expanded my office space downtown." "How quaint," she replied. "I remember when Richard's grandmother had a little hobby business selling homemade jams. It kept her occupied in her later years." Derek chuckled along with his family while I struggled to maintain my composure. My career was not a hobby. I had built my practice from nothing, earned advanced certifications, and now managed portfolios worth millions. Yet to the Blackwells, it seemed like a cute diversion. The appetizers arrived, a parade of delicacies that covered our table. Osetra caviar on blinis, foie gras torchon, truffle tartare, Kumamoto oysters, and seared scallops with gold leaf. The server described each dish in reverent detail, emphasizing the rare ingredients and complex preparations. "Only the best for the Blackwells," Richard declared, raising his champagne flute. 35 years of marriage deserves a proper celebration." Everyone clinked glasses. I sipped the exquisite champagne, trying to enjoy it despite my growing unease. The family discussed their recent adventures. Thomas's impromptu trip to Bali, Amanda and Grant's new yacht, Jacqueline's private shopping experience at a famous designer's atelier in Paris. Each story emphasized their wealth and privilege, often with subtle comparisons to those less fortunate. Our pilot was simply terrible, Amanda complained about their recent flight to the Maldives. Can you imagine? He suggested we might experience turbulence, as if we would tolerate such discomfort. As the appetizer plates were cleared, the main course menus arrived. Richard ordered another 2 bottles of wine, this time a rare Burgundy that the sommelier proclaimed was exceptional. Derek leaned over to whisper to me, but instead of reassurance, he merely said, "Order whatever you want. No expense spared tonight." I selected the least expensive entree on the menu, a mushroom risotto that still cost $75. Everyone else ordered lobster, Wagyu beef, and other premium dishes without a second glance at the prices. Derek's behavior continued to transform throughout the meal. At home, he was usually considerate, asking about my day and sharing his own experiences. Here, among his family, he became someone else entirely. He laughed too loudly at his father's mildly offensive jokes, dismissed topics I tried to introduce, and repeatedly touched his sister's girlfriend's arm while complimenting her exquisite taste. Derek was always the one with the refined palate, Jacqueline said proudly, as he discussed wine vintages with the sommelier. Even as a child, he could tell the difference between truffle varieties. "Remember when Ashlyn brought that grocery store wine to Thanksgiving?" Amanda snickered. "What was it called? Something Arbor?" "Glen Ellen," Derek corrected with a small smirk. An interesting choice. I felt my face burn. That had been my first holiday with the Blackwells, and I had brought a bottle that my father always enjoyed. I had no idea it would become a running joke. "We cannot all be born with silver spoons," I said lightly, trying to deflect with humor. "Some of us had to learn about wine after college." The table fell silent, and Jacqueline's smile tightened. "Yes, well, we all have our backgrounds," she said dismissively. As the entrees arrived, each plate more elaborate than the last, Richard began talking about their newest hotel acquisition. "The property in Napa will be our finest yet," he declared. "The renovation budget alone is $8 million. "Speaking of budgets," Thomas interjected, "Derek, how is the audit coming along? Dad mentioned there were some discrepancies in the books." Derek's expression flickered with something I could not quite identify. Anxiety? Fear? He quickly composed himself and waved dismissively. "All handled," he said briskly. "Just some accounting errors. Nothing serious." Accounting errors? This was the first I had heard of any issues with the family business. Derek had always assured me everything was running smoothly. I made a mental note to ask him about it later. As we finished our main courses, Richard ordered dessert for the table. "One of everything," he instructed the startled server. "And bring the dessert wine menu." 8 elaborate desserts arrived, along with a bottle of ice wine that cost more than my first car. The table was a display of excess that made me increasingly uncomfortable. When had money become so meaningless to them? I thought of my clients who carefully saved for retirement, who made thoughtful decisions about their financial futures. This casual display of wealth felt almost obscene by comparison. As we picked at the array of desserts, Richard raised his glass again. "To family," he said, looking around the table but seeming to look through me rather than at me. "The most important asset in our portfolio." Everyone clinked glasses again, but I noticed that Derek barely acknowledged me during the toast. He was focused on his parents, on gaining their approval. I had never felt more like an outsider. Finally, as the evening wound down, the server approached with a black leather folder. "The bill, sir," he said, placing it discreetly next to Richard. Richard glanced at it, then passed it to Derek without opening it. "Take care of this, son," he said with a meaningful look. Derek took the folder, opened it briefly, then slid it across the table to me. "Ashlyn will handle this," he announced to the table. I opened the folder and nearly gasped aloud. The total was $8,822. I looked up at Derek in confusion, but his expression was impassive. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his tone suddenly cold. I thought. I began, aware that everyone was watching me. "I assumed your father would be paying, since it is his anniversary celebration." "Ashlyn," Derek said with an edge to his voice I had never heard before, "this is a family matter. As my wife, it is your responsibility to support family occasions. We discussed this." We had never discussed any such thing. I looked around the table, expecting someone to laugh, to reveal this was some kind of test or joke, but all I saw were expectant faces, watching to see how I would respond. The waiter hovered nearby, awaiting payment, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. This was not just about a dinner bill. It was about power, acceptance, and my place in the Blackwell hierarchy. "Derek," I said quietly, leaning toward him to keep our conversation private, "we never discussed me paying for a family dinner of this magnitude. This is nearly $9,000. He stared at me with cold eyes I barely recognized. "Do not make a scene," he hissed. "Just pay the bill so we can all leave with our dignity intact." "But this does not make sense," I persisted, still keeping my voice low. "Why would I pay for your parents' anniversary dinner? Especially when I was not even consulted about the restaurant choice or menu selections?" Derek's face hardened. "Because I said so," he replied, no longer bothering to whisper. "This is how we do things in my family." By now, the entire table was watching our exchange with undisguised interest. Jacqueline's lips were pursed in disapproval, while Richard checked his watch impatiently. Amanda whispered something to Grant, who smirked in response. "Is there a problem with your wife's credit limit, Derek?" Thomas asked, loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. Hot embarrassment flooded my cheeks as other diners turned to look. This was no longer a private disagreement, but a public humiliation. "Of course not," Derek snapped. "Ashlyn is just being difficult. She knows her responsibilities." I flashed back to 6 months earlier when Derek had suggested I add him to my accounts for convenience. I had agreed without much thought, trusting him completely. Now I wondered if this had been his plan all along. "I never agreed to finance your family events," I said, finding my voice despite the trembling in my hands. "This is unfair and you know it." Derek's expression darkened. "Life is unfair, Ashlyn. My family accepted you despite your background. The least you can do is show some gratitude." His words stung like a physical blow. "Despite your background." As if my middle-class upbringing was something to be ashamed of, something the Blackwells had generously overlooked. "Actually," Jacqueline interjected, "we have always operated this way. The newest member of the family handles certain financial obligations as a demonstration of commitment. It is tradition." This was the first I had heard of any such tradition. I looked at Jessica, wondering if she would be expected to pay for extravagant dinners next. She studiously avoided my gaze, suddenly very interested in her dessert fork. The waiter approached again. "Is everything all right? Would you like me to run the card now?" All eyes were on me. I could feel the judgment from neighboring tables, the whispers behind manicured hands. This elite restaurant was apparently a regular haunt for the Blackwells, and I was causing a disruption to their carefully cultivated image. With shaking hands, I reached for my purse and extracted my credit card, a premium card I had qualified for after years of building excellent credit. I handed it to the waiter, who took it with a sympathetic glance that only increased my humiliation. "This is not right," I said quietly to Derek as the waiter walked away. "What is not right is your attitude," he replied coldly. "If this is how you feel about supporting my family, perhaps we need to reconsider our arrangement." "Our arrangement?" I repeated, stunned by his clinical description of our marriage. "Yes," he said, leaning in close so only I could hear. "It is your job to pay. If you do not like it, get a divorce. You are not part of our family anyway." The words hit me like ice water. 4 years of marriage reduced to a transactional arrangement that I could leave if I did not comply with their demands. I sat in stunned silence as the waiter returned with the payment terminal. "I am sorry, ma'am," he said quietly. "Your card has been declined." A fresh wave of mortification washed over me. The card had a $20,000 limit that I never approached. There was no reason for it to be declined unless— "Try this one," I said, pulling out my backup card, connected to my personal emergency savings account. As the waiter processed this card, I pulled out my phone and quickly checked my banking app. My primary account showed multiple large transfers over the past week, draining nearly all available credit, transfers I had never authorized. The payment went through this time. The waiter returned the card and receipt, which I signed mechanically, adding a generous tip despite everything. The poor server did not deserve to suffer for my family drama. As I replaced my card in my wallet, I noticed Derek watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Triumph? Relief? Whatever it was, it confirmed that something was very wrong. I stood up abruptly. "I need some air," I announced, not caring anymore what the Blackwells thought of me. "Ashlyn," Derek began, but I was already walking away. "Thank you for a lovely evening," I called over my shoulder, summoning every ounce of dignity I possessed. "Congratulations on your anniversary, Jacqueline and Richard." I walked steadily through the restaurant, past the curious stares and whispered comments, out the ornate doors, and into the cool Seattle night. Only then, standing alone on the sidewalk with the sound of the bay in the distance, did I allow myself to acknowledge the magnitude of what had just happened. My husband had publicly humiliated me, demanded I pay an exorbitant bill for his family's celebration, then threatened our marriage when I questioned it. Worse, someone had been making unauthorized transfers from my accounts. I pulled out my phone to call a rideshare, noticing my hands were still shaking. As I waited for the car to arrive, I scrolled through my banking app again, looking more closely at the recent transfers. $5,000 on Monday, $3,000 on Wednesday, another $2,000 this morning, all transferred to an account I did not recognize. The door of the restaurant opened behind me, and I tensed, expecting Derek. Instead, it was the waiter who had served us. "Ma'am," he said hesitantly, "I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Do you need me to call someone for you?" His kindness nearly broke me. "Thank you," I managed. "I have a ride coming." He nodded, then glanced around before speaking again. "I should not say this, but your husband asked for the bill to be inflated. Some of the charges were doubled." I stared at him. "What?" "It happens sometimes with certain customers," he explained uncomfortably. "They ask us to add charges to impress their guests or for business write-offs. I just thought you should know." Before I could respond, he slipped back inside. My rideshare arrived a moment later, and I climbed in, giving the driver my address. As we pulled away from the restaurant, I caught a glimpse of Derek and his family emerging onto the sidewalk, laughing together as if nothing unusual had happened. In that moment, as the distance between us grew, I realized something fundamental had changed. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage had not just been damaged, but destroyed. And I had a sinking feeling this dinner debacle was just the beginning of whatever was really going on. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. "Where did you go? You are embarrassing me." I turned off my phone without replying and watched the Seattle skyline pass by through tear-blurred eyes. I did not know what waited for me at home, but I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage would never be the same. The rideshare dropped me off in front of our Queen Anne house, a craftsman-style home that had once filled me with pride. Now it loomed before me like a stranger's dwelling. I paid the driver and walked up the stone path to our front door, fumbling with my keys. Inside, the house was dark and quiet. Too quiet. Usually, Derek left lights on if he knew I would be coming home alone. I called out his name, though I knew he was still at the restaurant. My voice echoed through the empty rooms. Something felt off. I moved through the house, turning on lights as I went. In the kitchen, there were no dirty dishes in the sink. The coffee maker was clean. Derek always made coffee in the morning and rarely cleaned up after himself. It looked as though no one had used the kitchen in days. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, increasingly uneasy. The bed was made perfectly, which was strange since Derek had left for work after me this morning. When I opened his closet, I found empty hangers where his favorite suits should have been. His toiletries were missing from the bathroom. Derek had not been home in days, despite telling me otherwise. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process this information. My husband had been lying about where he was staying, emptied my credit accounts, and publicly humiliated me. None of it made sense unless he was planning to leave me. The thought hit me with such force that I nearly doubled over. Was this dinner some kind of cruel goodbye? A final extraction of resources before he walked away? I pulled out my phone and turned it back on, steeling myself for messages from Derek. There were 3 texts and 2 missed calls, all from my friend Taylor, who had coincidentally been dining at Le Chateau with a client. Ash, I saw what happened. Are you okay? Read the first text. Call me when you can. That was beyond messed up, said the second. The third was more urgent. Seriously concerned about you. Derek's family has a reputation for shady business dealings. Be careful. I called Taylor immediately. Oh, thank God, she answered on the first ring. I was about to drive to your house. You saw everything? I asked, my voice small. Enough to know your husband is a complete jerk, Taylor replied. Making you pay for that dinner was bad enough, but I overheard him talking to his father in the restroom area. Ash, I think they're using you somehow. My blood ran cold. What did you hear exactly? Richard asked if she took care of it, and Derek said, every last penny, and they both laughed. Then Richard said something about one final transfer tomorrow, and how she will never know what hit her. I thanked Taylor, promised to stay in touch, and ended the call. With shaking hands, I opened my laptop and logged into all my financial accounts. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. Not only had my credit card been maxed out, but my checking account had been drained to the minimum balance. My investment account showed recent transfers to an offshore entity I did not recognize. Only my emergency savings account, which Derek did not know about, remained untouched. I pulled up our joint account, which we had established when we first married. It should have contained at least $50,000. The balance read $12.34. The withdrawal history showed dozens of transfers over the past month, all to accounts with names like BW Holdings and Blackwell Enterprises. As a financial consultant, I recognized the pattern immediately. Someone was systematically draining my assets, and since Derek was a co-authorized user on most of my accounts, it was all technically legal. I moved to Derek's home office, searching for any clues about what was happening. His desk drawers yielded nothing unusual, but when I checked the shredder, I found it full of destroyed documents. I carefully extracted some pieces, laying them out like a puzzle. Most were too shredded to decipher, but I could make out the letterhead of the family business, Blackwell Luxury Properties, and fragments that mentioned audit and discrepancies. Then I remembered Thomas's comment at dinner about accounting errors. Was the Blackwell business in trouble? I turned on Derek's computer, guessing his password on the third try. His email inbox contained primarily family communications, but one folder labeled Personal caught my eye. Inside were exchanges with someone named Meredith from an accounting firm. The auditors are asking questions about the missing $2 million. One email from Meredith read, "Your father's creative accounting won't hold up much longer. We need to consider damage control." Another email, from just 3 days ago, was more direct. "Transfer whatever liquid assets you can access immediately. The investigation moves to formal charges next week. Your offshore accounts are ready." My hands trembled as I continued searching. I found a folder of documents, including scanned copies of loan applications with my signature. Loans I had never applied for. The forged signatures were good but not perfect. Someone had been taking out loans in my name. I checked the cloud storage linked to Derek's account and found a photo album labeled Mary. The thumbnail showed Derek with his arm around a striking redhead. I opened it, each image, confirming what I already suspected. Derek was having an affair, apparently with the same Meredith who was advising him on financial matters. The photos were time-stamped over the past 8 months. 8 months of lies, 8 months of betrayal, while I worked and contributed to what I thought was our shared life and future. I sat back in Derek's chair, overwhelmed by the scale of the deception. My husband was having an affair, draining my accounts, and apparently involved in some kind of financial fraud through the family business. And somehow, I had been completely blind to all of it. My phone rang, startling me. It was Taylor again. "Ash, turn on the news," she said without preamble. "Channel 4. I grabbed the remote and turned on the television in Derek's office. The local news was running a story about a prominent Seattle business family under investigation for financial irregularities. Though they did not name the Blackwells directly, the reporters stood in front of the downtown building that housed their corporate headquarters. Sources close to the investigation suggest evidence of tax fraud, embezzlement, and misappropriation of investor funds, the reporter said gravely. Arrests are expected in coming days. I thanked Taylor and hung up, my mind racing. The pieces were falling into place. The Blackwells' business was under investigation. They were facing potential criminal charges. And Derek had been using me, using my good credit and financial expertise to help hide or move money. The dinner tonight suddenly made terrible sense. It was not just about humiliating me or extracting money. It was about creating a public scene, establishing a narrative of marital discord that Derek could use to distance himself from me when everything fell apart. As this realization dawned, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I did not recognize. I answered cautiously. "Ashlyn Blackwell," a formal voice asked. "Speaking," I replied, my throat dry. "This is Special Agent Wilson, with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. We'd like to speak with you regarding Blackwell Luxury Properties and certain financial transactions made through your accounts." My heart pounded as I arranged to meet the agent the following morning. When I hung up, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold, clear anger and determination. I was a financial expert. I had built my career helping people protect and grow their assets. And while I had been blindsided by Derek's betrayal, I was not helpless, not by a long shot. I moved methodically through the house, gathering important documents, copying files, and taking photos of evidence. I called my bank's emergency line and reported unauthorized access to my accounts, initiating fraud investigations. I contacted the credit bureaus to place freezes on my credit. As I worked, my mind kept returning to Derek's cruel words at the restaurant. "If you do not like it, get a divorce. You are not part of our family anyway." He was right about one thing. I was not a Blackwell. I was Ashlyn Weber, who had foolishly taken his name, but had never lost her own identity. And right now, that was my greatest strength. I was packing a suitcase with essentials when my phone rang again. This time, it was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen, wondering what lies he would tell, what manipulation he would attempt next. After 4 rings, I answered, saying nothing. "Ashlyn?" His voice was high and tight with panic. "I need your help. Something terrible has happened." "Something terrible has happened," Derek repeated, when I did not immediately respond. "I need you to come right away." The tremor in his voice sounded genuine, but I had learned tonight that my husband was a skilled actor. I kept my own voice even and detached. "What happened, Derek?" "I cannot explain over the phone. Just come to the downtown police station. Please, Ash. I know you are angry about dinner, But this is serious. My mind raced. The police station? Was he already being arrested for financial crimes? Are you in custody? I asked directly. His breath hitched. Not exactly. They are just asking questions. But they mentioned your name, Ash. They think you might be involved. A chill ran through me. Of course they would suspect me. I was his wife, a financial professional whose accounts had been used for suspicious transfers. On paper, I might even look like an accomplice. What exactly did you tell them about me? I asked, trying to keep the alarm from my voice. Nothing bad, he said quickly. Too quickly. I explained that you handle our personal finances, that is all. But they want to talk to you. Tonight. It is important, Ash. For both of us. I closed my eyes, thinking through my options. Meeting with police without legal representation was risky, but refusing to cooperate would only make me appear more suspicious. And I needed to understand exactly what Derek had told them. All right, I said finally. Which station? The main headquarters downtown. Ask for Detective Calloway. I will tell them you are coming. His relief was palpable. Thank you, Ash. I knew I could count on you. The sincerity in his voice almost made me falter. This was the Derek I thought I had married, the man who had won my trust and love. But it was also the same man who had emptied my accounts and humiliated me hours earlier. I will be there in 30 minutes, I said, then added, and Derek, do not thank me yet. I hung up before he could respond and immediately called Taylor. I need a favor, I said when she answered. Can you recommend a good criminal attorney? One who specializes in financial crimes? My cousin Jordan is a former prosecutor, now in private practice. She handles white-collar cases, Taylor replied without hesitation. Want me to call her? Please. Tell her I may need her to meet me at the downtown police station as soon as possible. After arranging for the attorney, I quickly changed into a conservative pantsuit, the same one I wore for important client meetings. I needed to look composed and professional, not like a woman whose life was falling apart. I grabbed my documentation, locked the house, and drove downtown, rehearsing what I would say. I would be cooperative but cautious. I would make it clear that I was a victim, not an accomplice. Most importantly, I would not allow Derek to sacrifice me to save himself. The police station was brightly lit and busy despite the late hour. I approached the desk sergeant, asking for Detective Calloway as Derek had instructed. The officer looked confused. We do not have a Detective Calloway on staff, ma'am. My suspicion, already high, ratcheted up further. My husband, Derek Blackwell, called me to come meet him here. He said he was being questioned. The sergeant checked his computer. We do not have anyone by that name in the building, ma'am. Are you sure it was this precinct? I felt a rush of adrenaline. Derek had lied again. But why send me to an empty police station? Just then, my phone rang. It was Jordan Wells, Taylor's cousin. Ashlyn? I am parked outside the station. Taylor filled me in on the basics. There has been a change of plans, I told her. My husband is not here. I think he may have sent me on a wild goose chase. Jordan's voice sharpened. That is concerning. Where are you exactly? I described my location, and she suggested I wait inside while she parked. As we spoke, I noticed a text message had arrived from Derek. Change of plans. Meet at the Blackwell corporate office instead. Family emergency meeting with our attorneys. Come immediately. I showed the message to Jordan when she arrived, a sharp-featured woman in her early 40s with an air of absolute competence. This feels like a setup, she observed. Given what you have told me about the unauthorized transfers and forged loan documents, I strongly advise against going alone. But I need to know what they are planning, I argued. And if they are meeting with attorneys, I should hear what is being said. Jordan considered this. All right, but I am coming with you. Do not sign anything, and do not make any statements about financial matters without consulting me first. We drove separately to the Blackwell corporate headquarters, a a gleaming high-rise in the financial district. At this hour, the building was mostly empty, but the security guard recognized me and allowed us up to the executive floor. The conference room was lit up, and through the glass walls, I could see Derek, his parents, and 3 people in expensive suits whom I recognized as the family's legal team. They were gathered around documents spread across the table, talking intently. Derek looked up as I entered, his expression shifting from surprise to forced welcome. His eyes darted to Jordan with clear alarm. "Ashlyn, you came." He moved to embrace me, but I stepped back. "Who is this?" "Jordan Wells, attorney at law." Jordan introduced herself smoothly, offering her business card. "I will be representing Mrs. Blackwell's interests." Richard Blackwell stood, his imposing frame tense with displeasure. "This is a family matter, Miss Wells. Your services are not required." "On the contrary," Jordan replied coolly. "Given the nature of the financial transactions involving my client's accounts and the apparent misrepresentations made to bring her here, I believe my presence is essential." Jacqueline's perfectly made-up face tightened. "Derek, you said she would come alone." "I did not realize my wife felt the need for legal counsel to meet with her family," Derek said, attempting to sound hurt rather than thwarted. I looked at the documents on the table and recognized forms for property transfers and power of attorney. My suspicions crystallized into certainty. "You were never at the police station," I said to Derek. "There is no Detective Calloway." "A misunderstanding," Derek said smoothly. "After I called, Dad suggested meeting here first to get our strategy straight before talking to authorities." "What authorities?" I challenged. "What exactly is going on, Derek?" One of the Blackwell attorneys, a silver-haired man named Stanford, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss this calmly." As we took seats, I noticed Richard slide certain documents out of my line of sight. Jordan noticed too, her eyes narrowing. "Let me be direct," Stanford began. "The Blackwell Enterprises are facing some regulatory challenges. Nothing serious, but we need to restructure certain assets temporarily. As a family member with financial expertise, your assistance would be valuable, Ashlyn." "What kind of assistance?" Jordan asked before I could respond. Stanford slid a document toward me. "We have prepared a temporary transfer of some properties into Ashlyn's name, just until the regulatory matter is resolved." Jordan reached for the document first, scanning it quickly. "This is not a temporary transfer. This is an assumption of debt obligation for 3 properties that appear to be significantly underwater." Richard's face flushed with anger. "This is family business. We take care of our own." "By transferring failing assets and their associated debt to Ashlyn?" Jordan asked incredulously. "Along with a power of attorney that would give Derek control over all her financial decisions?" I stared at my husband in shock. "You are going to make me liable for family debts and then take control of my finances?" Derek at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. "It is just a legal formality, Ash. To protect the family interests while this regulatory misunderstanding is cleared up." "Misunderstanding?" I echoed. "Is that what you call financial fraud? Tax evasion? Embezzlement?" The room went silent. Derek and his parents exchanged alarmed glances. "Who have you been talking to?" Richard demanded. Jordan placed a restraining hand on my arm, but I was beyond being silenced. "I know about the investigation," I said, looking directly at Derek. "I know about the missing $2 million. I know about Meredith." At the mention of his mistress, Derek's facade cracked. Fear flashed across his face. "You do not understand," he began. "I understand perfectly," I cut him off. "You married me for my financial expertise and clean credit history. When your family business started facing legal troubles, you decided to use me as a scapegoat. Transfer the questionable assets to me, saddle me with the debt, then control my finances through power of attorney." Stanford attempted to intervene. "These are serious accusations, Mrs. Blackwell." "They are facts," I replied. "And I have evidence. copies of forged loan applications with my signature, records of unauthorized transfers from my accounts, emails discussing how to hide assets from auditors and investigators. The attorneys exchanged concerned glances. One began gathering documents from the table. "I think we need to adjourn this meeting," he said tersely. "I agree," Jordan said, standing. "My client has nothing further to discuss without formal discovery and deposition." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "You will regret this, Ashlyn. We welcomed you into our family despite your background. This is how you repay our generosity?" His words echoed Derek's at the restaurant. The same contempt for my background, the same assumption that I should be grateful for their conditional acceptance. "No, Richard," I replied, finding a strength I did not know I possessed. "You will regret attempting to defraud me and use me as your family's fall person. I have an appointment with the FBI tomorrow morning. I suggest you prepare accordingly." Derek moved toward me, his expression desperate. "Ash, please. We can work this out. I love you." For a moment, looking at his familiar face, I felt a pang of what might have been grief for the marriage I thought I had. But it passed quickly, replaced by clarity. "No, Derek, you do not. You never did. You loved what I could do for you and your family. That is not the same thing." I turned and walked out of the conference room, Jordan beside me. As the elevator doors closed on the stunned faces of the Blackwell family, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. "You handled that well," Jordan observed. "But you should know that they will not give up easily. People like the Blackwells rarely do." "I know," I said, my resolve hardening. "That is why I am going to make sure they face consequences for what they have done. Not just to me, but to everyone they have defrauded." As we exited the building into the cool night air, I took a deep breath. For the first time since the disastrous dinner hours earlier, I felt like myself again. The path ahead would be difficult, but at least now I was walking it with open eyes. Dawn was breaking over Elliott Bay as I sat in Jordan's office, surrounded by financial statements, emails, and legal documents. We had been working through the night, piecing together the full extent of the Blackwell's scheme and my unwitting role in it. "Based on what we have gathered," Jordan said, reviewing her notes, "the Blackwell family has been running a complex fraud operation for at least 3 years. They diverted investor funds from their hotel properties, falsified occupancy rates to secure additional financing, and used shell companies to hide the money trail." I nodded, the financial consultant in me understanding the mechanics even as the betrayed wife struggled with the personal implications. And when auditors started asking questions, they needed a scapegoat. "Enter you," Jordan confirmed. "A financial professional with impeccable credentials and access to accounts they could utilize. Perfect for taking the fall when everything collapsed." The methodical dismantling of my financial life had been underway for months. Derek had gradually increased his control over our shared accounts, suggested I consolidate my personal accounts for better management, and consistently undermined my concerns about family spending. "The dinner last night," I mused. That was their way of establishing a public record of marital discord. So when I was implicated in their fraud, they could claim I had gone rogue, acting without their knowledge. "Exactly," Jordan agreed. "And judging by the documents they wanted you to sign, they were accelerating their timeline. Something must have spooked them." My meeting with Special Agent Wilson was scheduled for 9 o'clock. Before that, we needed to organize our evidence and prepare my statement. Jordan had advised full cooperation with the investigation, emphasizing my status as a victim rather than an accomplice. "The timing works in our favor," she noted. "You discovered the fraud and came forward immediately, before arrests were made. That lends credibility to your account." As we worked, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Derek, alternating between pleading and threatening. I forwarded each one to Jordan without responding. "Good," she approved. "No contact except through counsel. We want everything on record." By 8:30, we had assembled a comprehensive file documenting the unauthorized transfers from my accounts, the forged loan applications, and the attempts to make me assume liability for failing Blackwell properties. There's one more thing I need to do, I said, pulling out my laptop. I need to protect my clients. As a financial consultant, I managed investments for dozens of individuals and families who trusted me with their financial security. If I was publicly linked to a fraud investigation, even as a victim, the reputational damage could be devastating. I drafted a careful email to my firm's partners, explaining the situation and requesting temporary reassignment of my clients until the matter was resolved. I emphasized that the investigation involved my personal finances, not my professional conduct, but acknowledged the potential for confusion and concern. This is harder than anything else, I admitted to Jordan as I pressed send. I built my practice from nothing. The idea that my clients might doubt my integrity. They will not, Jordan assured me. Not once the facts come out. But this is a prudent step to protect them, and yourself. As we prepared to leave for the FBI office, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. Mrs. Blackwell? A woman's voice asked when I answered. This is Julia Parker. I do not know if you remember me. The name was vaguely familiar. I am sorry. How do we know each other? I was briefly married to Thomas Blackwell 3 years ago, she explained. I heard from a friend in the financial community that there might be an investigation into the family. My interest sharpened. Yes, that is correct. I have information that might help you, Julia said, about how they operate, how they dispose of people who get in their way. I was not their only victim. Jordan, who had been listening, gestured for me to put the call on speaker. I would be very interested in talking with you, I said carefully. Would you be willing to meet with me and my attorney? Yes, Julia agreed immediately. There are others too. 3 of us, actually. Former wives and business partners who were set up to take the fall for Blackwell financial misdeeds. A pattern emerged as Julia shared her story, one that matched my experience with eerie precision. The gradual isolation from outside friends and resources, the subtle undermining of financial independence, the sudden claims of business emergency, requiring temporary asset transfers. And finally, when resistance was offered, the threats and abandonment. We called ourselves the Blackwell survivors, Julia explained with grim humor. We have been watching the family for years, documenting their patterns. We just never had enough concrete evidence to get authorities to take us seriously. By the time we arrived at the federal building to meet Agent Wilson, our case had grown substantially stronger. 3 former Blackwell spouses were on their way to join us, each with their own documentation of the family's predatory patterns. Agent Wilson, a no-nonsense woman with 20 years of financial crimes experience, listened attentively as I laid out the evidence. We have been investigating Blackwell luxury properties for 18 months, she confirmed when I finished. Your information fills in several crucial gaps in our understanding of how they operated. Will you be making arrests? I asked. Imminently, she replied. But I should warn you, Mrs. Blackwell, the family will not go down without a fight. They have resources, connections, and a history of retaliating against whistleblowers. I understand the risks, I said firmly, but I cannot allow them to continue victimizing others. As predicted, the Blackwells fought back with every weapon in their considerable arsenal. Their attorneys filed countersuits alleging that I had been the architect of the financial improprieties. They attempted to freeze my remaining assets. Derek gave tearful interviews portraying himself as the betrayed husband whose wife had secretly undermined the family business. But they had underestimated me and the network of support I was building. Julia Parker and the other former Blackwell spouses came forward publicly, establishing the pattern of predation. Financial journalists began investigating the family's history of suspicious business dealings. Former employees, emboldened by the crumbling of the Blackwell facade, provided additional evidence of wrongdoing. Most crucially, my own professional network rallied around me. Fellow financial consultants, many of whom had encountered the Blackwells in business contexts, vouched for my integrity. My firm's partners, after reviewing the evidence, issued a public statement of support. 3 weeks after the disastrous dinner, I watched from Jordan's office as federal agents arrested Richard, Jacqueline, and Derek Blackwell on charges of wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. The news coverage showed Derek being led away in handcuffs, his expression stunned, as if he could not believe his family's power had failed to protect him. "It is not over," Jordan cautioned as we watched. "The criminal case will take months, possibly years, and there will be civil litigation to recover your losses." "I know," I acknowledged, "but this is a beginning." That evening, I met with Julia Parker and the other women who had shared their stories. Over dinner at a modest restaurant far removed from the luxury of Le Chateau, we exchanged experiences and strategies for rebuilding our lives after the Blackwells had torn them apart. "The hardest part," said Ellen, who had briefly been partnered with Jacqueline's brother in a real estate venture, "is trusting your own judgment again. You question every decision, wondering how you could have been so blind." I nodded in understanding. Despite the mounting evidence of Derek's duplicity, part of me still struggled to reconcile the man I thought I had married with the criminal who had tried to destroy me. "That is why community matters," Julia said firmly. "We validate each other's experiences. We confirm that it was not a failure of judgment but a deliberate, calculated deception by experts in manipulation." As the conversation continued, an idea began to form in my mind. Each of us had professional skills that had survived our entanglement with the Blackwells. Julia was an attorney specializing in contract law. Ellen had expertise in real estate. Mariah, the third woman, was a marketing specialist. "What if we formalize this support network?" I suggested. "Not just for ourselves, but for others who have experienced financial abuse and exploitation." The concept resonated immediately. By the end of the evening, we had outlined a foundation that would provide resources, education, and advocacy for victims of financial abuse. We would offer seminars on financial independence, connect victims with legal resources, and work to strengthen laws against economic exploitation. As I drove home to the small apartment I had rented after leaving the house I had shared with Derek, I felt a sense of purpose taking root. The Blackwells had attempted to use my financial expertise against me, to make me complicit in their crimes. Instead, I would use that same expertise to help others protect themselves from predators like them. The road ahead would not be easy. The legal battles would be draining, both financially and emotionally. There would be days when the weight of betrayal would threaten to overwhelm me. But for the first time since that fateful dinner, I looked toward the future with something approaching hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Derek's attorney reached out about a potential deal. He is offering information about his parents' offshore accounts in exchange for leniency. The family was fracturing, turning against each other as their empire crumbled. I felt no satisfaction in their downfall, only a quiet determination that justice would be served, not just for me but for everyone they had harmed, in their pursuit of wealth and power. I replied simply, "Let the prosecutors decide. I have moved on to more important work." And I had. The foundation we had conceptualized over dinner already felt more real and meaningful than anything I had shared with the Blackwells. Where they had built their legacy on exploitation and deceit, we would build ours on protection and truth. 1 year later, I stood at the podium in a sunlit conference room, looking out at the faces of women and men who had gathered for the inaugural symposium of the Financial Autonomy Foundation. The journey from that devastating dinner to this moment had been arduous but transformative. "Financial abuse leaves no visible bruises," I began, "but its impact can be just as devastating as physical violence. It isolates, it controls, it diminishes self-worth, and it thrives in silence and shame." The audience nodded in understanding. Many were survivors themselves, while others were professionals seeking to better serve vulnerable clients. "Today, we break that silence," I continued. "We share our experiences not as victims, but as experts who have navigated complex systems of exploitation and emerged with valuable knowledge to share." In the front row sat Julia, Ellen, and Mariah, my partners in creating the foundation. Behind them were financial counselors, attorneys, law enforcement specialists, and advocates who had joined our mission over the past year. The criminal case against the Blackwells had concluded 3 months earlier, with guilty verdicts on most charges. Richard and Derek were serving prison sentences, while Jacqueline received probation after cooperating with prosecutors. The civil litigation had resulted in partial recovery of my losses, though the family had hidden assets so effectively that much of their wealth remained beyond reach. But financial restitution had ceased to be my primary concern. The foundation had become my focus, my purpose, and ultimately my healing. When my husband demanded I pay an $8,800 dinner bill and then threatened divorce if I refused, I was stunned and humiliated, I shared openly. What I did not realize then was that this public drama was just one piece of an elaborate scheme to isolate me, drain my resources, and position me to take the blame for his family's financial crimes. I detailed the aftermath, discovering the unauthorized transfers, finding evidence of the affair, uncovering the forged loan documents, and eventually learning about the federal investigation into the Blackwell business empire. Each discovery was painful, I acknowledged, but each also represented a step toward truth and eventual freedom. Today, I am not defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to do in response. The foundation had already helped dozens of individuals extricate themselves from financially abusive relationships and navigate the complex legal and emotional challenges that followed. We had conducted workshops for law enforcement on recognizing signs of economic coercion. We had lobbied for stronger protections against financial exploitation. The most important lesson I learned, I told the audience, is that financial autonomy is not just about money. It is about agency, the ability to make choices that align with your values, the freedom to leave situations that diminish your worth, the power to build a life that reflects your true self, not someone else's expectations. After my presentation, a young woman approached me, twisting her hands nervously. "Your story resonated with me," she said quietly. "I think I might be in a similar situation, but I am not sure. He says I am just bad with money, that he needs to manage our finances for my own good." I recognized the doubt in her eyes, the same uncertainty that had plagued me despite obvious warning signs. I invited her to join me for coffee, and for the next hour, I listened as she described patterns of control and isolation all too familiar. By the end of our conversation, she had scheduled an appointment with one of our financial counselors and had installed an app that would document her husband's comments about her spending habits. Small steps toward awareness, and eventually, I hoped, toward freedom. Later that evening, I returned to my new home, a comfortable condo overlooking the same bay visible from the restaurant where my marriage had effectively ended. The irony was not lost on me, but the view no longer triggered painful memories. Instead, it reminded me of how far I had come. My phone chimed with a message from Jordan, who had become both my attorney and my friend. "Thought you would want to know. Derek is attempting to appeal his sentence. Not likely to succeed." I felt a momentary tightness in my chest at the mention of his name, but it passed quickly. Derek Blackwell was part of my past, not my future. His choices had led him to prison, just as mine had led me to purpose and community. My professional life had also rebounded. After the Blackwell case made headlines, my firm had not only welcomed me back, but promoted me to partner, recognizing the expertise I had gained through my ordeal. My client roster had grown, with many specifically seeking me out because of my experience with financial exploitation. I had even cautiously begun dating again, though I approached relationships with new awareness and healthy boundaries. Trust would always be something I gave carefully, but isolation was not the answer either. As I prepared for bed, I glanced at the vision board I had created during my recovery, filled with images and words representing the life I was building. Financial security, authentic connection, service to others, personal growth. The Blackwells had sought to use me as a pawn in their game of wealth and power. Instead, they had inadvertently set me on a path to greater purpose and fulfillment than I had ever known in my marriage. The dinner that was meant to humiliate and control me had become the catalyst for transformation. The $8,800 bill, intended as a financial drain, had instead been an investment in my awakening. The threat of divorce, meant to intimidate, had actually been the first step toward genuine freedom. I thought of all the people still trapped in cycles of financial abuse, believing themselves powerless or unworthy. Tomorrow, I would continue the work of reaching them, of offering both practical resources and the most powerful tool of all, the knowledge that they were not alone, that recovery was possible, that their worth was not measured by a bank account or a balance sheet. This was the unexpected gift that had emerged from my darkest moment, the chance to transform personal pain into collective healing, to build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, to reclaim not just my financial autonomy, but my voice and my power. As I drifted towards sleep, I felt gratitude for the journey, difficult as it had been. The Blackwells had tried to write my story for me, casting me as either a complicit accomplice or a naive fool. But I had taken back the pen. I was the author now, writing a new chapter with every person we helped, every policy we changed, every life we touched through the foundation. Have you ever experienced a moment that seemed like the end of your story, but turned out to be just the beginning? A crisis that ultimately led to growth you could never have imagined? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that financial abuse can happen to anyone, regardless of education or background, and that recovery is always possible. Thank you for listening to my journey from devastation to determination, from betrayal to rebuilding. I hope it serves as a reminder that our lowest moments often contain the seeds of our greatest transformation.